Welcome to the third episode of the Discord.net bot development series. In this episode, we are going to make our own commands. Now, before we make our own commands, please make sure to watch episode 1 and 2 as we are going through installing the software and learning the basics in these episodes. Now, if you've watched these episodes, let's actually start making our command handler and start making our own commands. Now, you just heard me saying, let's make our own command handler, but don't we already have that? Well, yes and no. We have a command handler class, but we don't really have a method that is handling our commands. And that is exactly what we're going to make today, because we want our bot to be able to handle commands. Let's get started. In the previous episode, we talked about the ready event, which basically runs when the Discord bot is ready. Today, we're going to use another event, which is called discord.messageReceived. And this event is triggered when a new message is received. We're going to use the same exact way as that we did on ready. So we're just going to use a plus equals, and then we're going to say on message receive and a semicolon. Now again, this will become red. We can just hover over it and select the light bulb and click on generate method command handler on message received. And this task will basically handle all our commands. First thing we're going to start with is making a variable for our message, so we don't need to call it every single time. A simple way of doing this is by using var msg equals arg as socket user message. And this basically handles the message, puts it in a socket user message, and then we can call it by just calling message like this. Now, there are a few things that we want to make sure of. The first thing we want to check is if the message author is a bot, we just want to return, because we do not want any messages sent by a Discord bot to be read by our own bot. Now again, it might become red, and there is a very simple explanation for this. Because as you might have seen in the previous episodes, we need to return task.completed. But because we're actually going to use await and asynchronous functions, actually want to transform our task to a asynchronous task. And now the error is gone and everything is fine. Now let's make a new line and define the next thing that we're going to use. And this is basically called the context. So what you want to do is say var context equals new socket command context and then underscore Discord and then the message. Now what we can do with context is we can, for example, get the author from a message, or we can get the server from where the message is sent in, the channel, and every single other thing that we might need. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say int pause equals 0. And this position is going to be used to make sure where to search for the prefix, and we want that just to be at the beginning of the command. Now let's actually make something that is going to handle the prefix. We want to start by making an if statement, and between these brackets we're going to say message has string prefix, and then we're going to pass in our configuration prefix. Now, how did we do this before? We went to the startup service and we did this. We said config and then we said tokens Discord. Now, because we don't need to see in this tokens and then Discord, we can just use prefix. So we're just going to copy this, and don't forget to remove the semicolon, then paste it in here. And now we can replace this with prefix. And now it's actually going to get the prefix that we have defined here and then paste it in here. Now what we also want to do is we want to tell where to search for the prefix. And that is exactly at ref pause. So that will be 0 at the beginning of the string. Now what we also want to do, and this is optional, you can skip this if you want, but we also want to see if the bot is being pinged. So when the bot is being pinged at the start of a message, the bot will also work. For this we can just use has mentioned prefix and then underscore Discord.current user and then again ref pause, so it actually search for the beginning of the command. Now we want to add another bracket and then open with 2 curly brackets. Now what we want to do is we want to execute the command that it comes after the prefix. For this we're going to say var result equals await underscore commands dot execute asynchronous, and then context, which we made on line 34, and then we're going to pass the position and we're going to pass our service provider. Now basically this will return the result of the command being executed. This means that if there's, for example, an error, we can fetch that error based on the result. Now what we want to make sure of is if the message has been successfully executed, or the command. So what we're going to do is we want to say if result and then is success, which basically checks if the command has successfully been executed. If this is not the case, then we're going to use two curly brackets and we want to know the reason. So we're going to say var reason equals result dot error, and this basically gives us the reason why it did not succeed. Now what we can do is we can say await context dot channel dot send message async, which is going to send a message to one of our channels, and it's going to say the following error occurred. Now here's something new that we're going to use. We're going to use \n. Now what does \n do? Very simple. \n actually means that it generates a new line for us, because in this string we can't just do enter, because then we're going to get some errors, or it's going to use a plus sign, but then we don't get a new line. So to get a new line, we are using \n. Now here we can actually pass the reason to actually know what's went wrong. So here we're going to just pass the reason between two curly brackets, and don't forget to add a $sign at the beginning of the string. Now we use a bracket again just to close the string, and then we use a semicolon because it's the end of our line. Now something else that's optional but not necessary is console logging the error. So we can actually let the console know what went wrong. So we can also do console.writeLine and then reason, so the console also gets alerted about what went wrong. Now this is actually all we need just to execute the command. We could actually use more if statements to more filter messages or commands, and we could also use more complicated versions of error handling, but that is not something we're going to do in this episode, because in this episode we are going to make our own commands. Now to keep all our commands a bit organized, we are going to use a folder to store all the command files in. We're going to make a new folder under the Solution Explorer. We're going to click on our solution, click on add, click on new folder, and you can call this whatever you want, it doesn't really matter, but for the tutorials we're just going to call these modules. Now in this folder you want to create a new class, and you can call this again whatever you like, it doesn't really matter, but all that's important is that you give this a name that you can recognize. So I am just going to use general.cs, so this basically means that we just have the general/basic commands in this file. Click on add to create the file, and there we go, we now have a class. Now to tell our program that this file can be used in order to execute commands, we're going to use a colon and then say module base. And if you use tab, it will also automatically add the using discord.commands, but if it doesn't, make sure to add this, otherwise you're going to get an error. Also, let's make this class public, and now we can make our commands between these two curly brackets. How do we make commands, you might ask? This is also very simple. You use two square brackets, and in between these type in command. Now we're going to use normal brackets and a string. What did we just do? We told our program that the command is whatever is here between the string. And we're going to start with a simple ping command, so we're just going to say ping. So now when the bot receives a message that has the prefix and this string, ping, it will execute the task that we're going to make under this. So let's make the task. We're going to say public async task ping, and then between two curly brackets we can make the commands do something. Now here we want to make sure that we actually include the tasks library, so click on the light bulb and click on using system threading tasks. Now we can use something that we've defined earlier, and that is the context. Because here we don't have something like message. Like if we head over to the command handler, we have here socket message argument. But here we have nothing. If you paid close attention, then you notice that in the command handler we pass the context with the executing command. So here a nice thing we can do is we can say context and then, for example, get the message or use a channel or use a server or whatever you want, but you can just call context instead of arg. Now what we want to do on this line is let our bot respond with pong, because ping pong. So what we're going to do is we're going to say await, because this is an asynchronous function that we're going to use. We're going to say await context dot channel dot send message async. And we've used this function before, remember, where we use it in the command handler to let our users know that there was an error. Now we can just say a string, so we're going to use the string and we're going to say pong, exclamation mark and a semicolon. Just one line to make our bot send a message. I told you things would get a lot easier now. Save it and run our program. Now the program is running, let's check Discord. As you can see, our bot is running, and let's use our prefix, exclamation mark, because we set that in our config file, and then ping. And there we go, it responded with pong, which is exactly the message that we told it to respond with. Perfect, everything works. Now we want to make another command, because we can make as many commands as we like in this file. Another nice thing we can do is embeds. Let's start with a nice command that is actually very nice, and we're going to call it info. We want this command to return some information about the user that is using it. So what we can do is we can say public async task and then info, two brackets, curly brackets, and now we're going to make an embed. You might be wondering, what is an embed? I can showcase you a very simple example. For the example, I went to the Discord API server, and as you can see here, our Denny sent a embed. So an embed is actually something that looks similar to this, and it's not really just text, it's like a nice formatted text with some nice colors, a picture here and there. And now let's make our own one. To actually create our embed, let's say var builder is because we want to use a embed builder equals new embed builder brackets. And again, notice that now we automatically also added using Discord. So if it didn't add it automatically for you, make sure to add it. Now we can pass a few arguments. The first argument we want to pass is dot with thumbnail URL, and in between brackets we can now tell a nice picture to let the bot send along with the embed. Now something nice we can do is we can get the profile picture of the user that used our command to show in the thumbnail. A simple way of doing this is saying context dot user dot get avatar URL. In some cases there are people that don't have a avatar set, and in that case you want to use two question marks and then context dot user dot get default avatar URL. The default avatar URL is, for example, the profile picture that our bot has. It is the default Discord profile picture. So what did we just do with these two question marks? If this is actually nothing, and nothing in code is actually null. So if this is null, so if there is no avatar URL and the person just has the default profile picture, then it will use this. So if the thing on the left side is nothing, it will use the thing on the right side. So we can always make sure that there will not be nothing. Now we can also pass another argument, which is going to be with description and then a string. And here we're going to say, in this message you can see some information about yourself, or any other messages you want to put here, it's fine. We can also define the color that is being used on the left side of the embed, and for that we're going to say dot with color and then new color. And here it's getting interesting. Now between these two brackets we need to define the red, green and blue value, basically RGB. Just pick a nice color. You can go to Google and just search for color picker. For example, if you search on Google for color picker, you're going to get this nice color picker. You can select a nice color that you want. We're going to go for a nice bluish color, and you can then copy the red, green, blue value right here. Go back to Visual Studio and paste the value right here. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to say with current timestamp. And this will add a nice timestamp at the end of the embed, telling us when this embed was generated. Now I'll add a semicolon because now we've passed some few arguments that we like. You can even add more, and a full list of arguments that you can use will be available in the description. Now we want to transform this builder in an actual embed. To do this, we can say var embed equals builder.build. And this will build the builder and then transform everything that we just passed in here to an actual embed. Now last but not least, we want this embed to be sent in a channel that we used. So now we can say await context.channel.send message async. We don't want to send any text, so we're going to say null, we're going to say false, and we're going to say embed. Now this is basically going to send our embed. Let's try it out. Save the program, run the tutorial, go to Discord and try out the new command. There you go, a nice embed with some text here and there. And now let's actually add some information about the user. Now let's close our console and let's go back to Visual Studio. Now to add some information about this user, we want to add fields. Now how do we add fields? Just let's go here behind the collar, press enter, and let's use add field. Now here we can define the title of our field. So let's start with saying user ID. So we're going to get the ID of the user. And to get that, we can just say context.user.id. And we want to make this inline. And inline means that it will show up next to each other. So fields will show up next to each other instead of under each other. Now let's run this and see what happens. Let's go to Discord and say info. And there we go. Now we have our user ID. Now let's go back, close our console, go back to Visual Studio, and let's add some more information. For example, we can add the discriminator. So what we can say here is discriminator, and then we say context.user.discriminator, and again we make this an inline field. And let's also add the creation date of the user. Now to do this, things get a bit more complicated, but for the title we can just say created at. But for the date we need to use something that is called a toString function. Now we can use context.user.createdAt, but this doesn't give us a nicely formatted way of the date. It gives us some weird kind of date time, which is the value or the type of this. If you hover over this, you can also see that this is a date time offset, but that's not what we want, because this is going to tell you the time, the seconds, the milliseconds, if it was AM or PM, and a bunch more information that you might like. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I want to format it to a date. And because I live in Europe, or more in the Netherlands, we use the day, then the month, and then the year. But you can adjust this to your liking. For example, you can say toString, which is the function I was talking about earlier, use brackets, use a string, and here we can pass our format. The format we're going to use, or what I am going to use, is we're going to use day, and then the month, and then the year. So how did I format this? DD stands for day, and uppercase M stands for month, and 4 times Y stands for the year. Now you can adjust this to your liking, like I said before. For example, you could put the month at the start and then the day here. As I said earlier, we're just going to use day, month, and then year. Now if we want to add the date when the user joined our server, then we can actually do the same thing, but we're just going to get a different value. So what we're going to do is we're going to say at field, and then we're going to say joined at. Now we want to get the context user, but we want to get the context user as a member of the server. And because just context user isn't actually the user that's from part of the server, but it's just the user, it's our user, we need a socket guild user. And how are we going to do this? Very simple. We're going to put one bracket here, and we're going to say context user as socket guild user, And notice how this automatically adds using Discord or WebSocket. So if you didn't get it automatically, add it here. And now we can use another bracket and we can say here dot joined at. We want to get the value of when we joined, and then we want to transform that value into a nicely formatted date. So we can just use dd/mm/yyyy. And then again, we need to make this nice field inline, so we say true. Let's save this and run it and see how this works. Now the bot is online, and let's use our command. There we go. We now have the user ID, the discriminator, the created at, and the joined at. Now, why is this here and not nicely here? Let's check our code. I see something, and I hope you see it too. We forgot to add true here, so let's add it right now. Save it and run it. Open Discord. Alright, so now if we execute the command, there we go. Now you might be wondering, why is it now under each other and not again next to each other? Why don't we have 4 columns? Well, 3 columns is the maximum amount of columns that can be placed next to each other. So for example, here what it does is, because it's 3, it will create a new line and then add the column right here and so on. So if we add more fields, they will just stack under each other. So if we add one more, it will go here. If we add another one, it will go here, and so on. Now, as you can see, we now have the user ID, the discriminator, the date when the account was created, and the date when we joined the server. Pretty cool, right? Now let's close our console again and go back to Visual Studio. Now let's add even more information. Let's go here, let's say add field, and then what we can also do is we can get a list of the roles that the user has. So we're going to say roles, we're going to use a comma, and here again we need to get the socket guild user. So we're going to do the exact same as that we did to get the join date. So we can say context dot user as socket guild user dot roles. So now we have the roles of the user, and again we're going to use another function. We're going to use a string function, and to do this what we can say is we're going to say string dot join, and then here we pass the roles. But before passing the roles, we want to pass a separator. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say 2 quotation marks and then a space, and then use a comma here, and then don't forget to add 1 more bracket at the end. And now let's save our code, run it, and see how this turns out. Let's run the command info, and we only have the everyone role, and that is correct because we only have the everyone role in this server. So let's go to our roles, and as you can see, we only have the everyone role and the tutorial role. The tutorial role is from the bot, so we cannot add that to ourselves. But if we create a new role, we're going to call it test, make it blue, save changes, exit it, give it to ourselves, and now let's execute the command, and voila, we also now have the test role. Now this might not look so nice because we want to, like, for example, mention the role, or we want to nicely show it, or maybe even get more information about the role. So let's do that. Close your console, go back to Visual Studio, and you might have noticed in Discord that we didn't have a new line, but that is on purpose. For example, if we have a lot of roles, you don't want that to be in line because then it's not going to look very nice. So we're just going to use a non-inline one. You could choose to remove the joined at one, or you could remove the discriminator, for example, and then everything will look nicely. For the tutorial, we're going to remove the discriminator value, and then we're going to use the roles to actually select the mention of the role and not just a name. To do this, we can say roles.select, then we're going to use a x, then a lambda expression, then you're going to use x.mention. And this is going to mention the role. It will not mention everyone, for example, but the only thing it's going to do is it's going to make the role look nice, and it's going to use the actual color of the role to highlight it. Now don't forget to add another bracket, save your code, run it, and let's execute the command in Discord. So let's go here, info, and ta-da! We now have the roles nicely next to each other, and they are now highlighted with a nice @ in front of them. But as you can see, it did not ping me because the message, if I would ping everyone, the message becomes yellow, and it didn't happen here because it didn't ping everyone. It just nicely mentioned the role, so we can, for example, see the nice color of blue in the background. Now let's close our console, go back to Visual Studio, and this is actually everything we need to do for this nice info command. Let's make another command, and we're going to call this the Purge Command. Now, purge. That is a very serious command, because we don't want all our users to just purge messages. And here is something new that we're going to use. We're going to use 2 square brackets, and then we're going to say require user permission. And then in 2 brackets we can say guild permission and then dot manage messages. This basically means that if the user has permissions to manage messages, like removing them, then the user is able to use the purge command. You could also require bot permission. So for example, if you want to make a command that requires a specific permission, then you could use this. But we're not going to use this. We're just going to use require user permission because our bot has administrative permissions. Now make a new line and let's create the task. So public async task purge. And here we're going to learn something new too. Now what we want to pass is we want to use, for example, an amount of messages that should be purged. So here what we can do is we can say int amount. And this basically means that there will be selected that amount of messages in the channel, and those will be removed. I will showcase you how this works in Discord when we have finished making the command. But in the meanwhile, let's make everything that's going to happen in the background. Use 2 curly brackets. And between these 2 brackets we want to get all the messages within the amount of messages that should be requested. So what we can do for this, we can say var messages equals await context dot channel dot get messages asynchronous, and then we're going to pass the amount of messages that should be requested, and then we also want to flatten asynchronously all those messages. Now what did we just do? We said get all the messages from the context channel, and it should be no more than the amount that we have passed. Now you could also use +1, and what this will do is it will also remove the message that initiated the purge command, so that it will also remove the purge message and the amount of messages that has been provided. Now to delete these messages, a simple thing we can do is we can say await and then context channel as socket text channel, and then delete messages asynchronously, and then pass the messages that we want to be deleted. Now this deletes all the messages in the channel that we just requested here. Now all we need to do is let the user know that it went successfully, and then all is set. But I want to make something nice, because some people don't like it when the success message still appears after the purge. They want it to be removed after a specific amount of time. Again, this is optional, you could skip this, but I would like to make something like this. What we're going to do is we're going to say var message equals await context.channel.send message async. Now we want to pass the number of messages that are deleted, and a simple way of doing this is we can say $, then use curly brackets, messages.count, and this is the count of messages that have been requested to be deleted. Now use 2 brackets to actually get the count, and then use a curly bracket to close it, and then say messages deleted successfully. Now use a semicolon at the end to close the line. And now what did we just do? We send a message to tell the user how many messages have been deleted, but we also stored the message that we sent in a variable. Now we want to wait a few seconds, and I would like to wait exactly 2.5 seconds. So what we can do here is we can say await task.delay 2,500 milliseconds, and then a semicolon. Now what does this do is it waits exactly 2,500 milliseconds before executing anything under this line. And this is perfect because we want to wait 2.5 seconds before the message gets deleted. So what we can do here is we can say wait message dot delete asynchronously, use two brackets, use a semicolon, and you're done. Let's save our code, run the tutorial, and go back to Discord, and let's execute the command purge 50. Now this will also let us know how many messages have been deleted, and as you can see, the message gets automatically removed. You could see, if you look back, that there were only 19 messages deleted, and that is exactly why we don't use the amount of messages the user wanted to be deleted, but we actually get the amount of messages that actually have been deleted. So for example, if we would now do purge 100, it would just tell us one message is actually deleted, because that's the message that we used to initiate the command. Now let's close the console and let's go back to Visual Studio, and this works perfectly fine. Let's make one more command. For this command, we're going to call it the server command, and this command is just going to return us some basic information about the server. We don't need any permissions for this command, so we're just going to make a task, public async task server, and we're also not going to pass any arguments. Now we can use a curly bracket, and we can here now actually get some information about the server. Let's again make a nice embed. So var builder is new embed builder, use two brackets, enter, and then a dot, and let's use the logo of the Discord server as a thumbnail URL. So with thumbnail URL context.guild.icon URL, and we can use this to get the icon of the server. We also want to use with description. We can say, in this message you can find some nice information about the current server. Now we're going to add a nice title, so we're going to say with title. Now in this title we're going to use a $sign at the start and then curly brackets. We're going to say context.guild.name. This is going to return us the name of the server, and then we're going to say information. So for example, in the tutorial server it will say tutorial information, and then let's add a nice color to the embed. We're going to use the same color that we used earlier, but you can use different one if you like. Now here we're going to add a new field, and we're going to say created at, which will return us when the server has been created. So we're going to use context.guild.created at, and then we're going to say toString, and nicely format our date. We're going to add how many members there are in the server, so we're going to say member count. Now to get the actual member count of the server, we want to do something like we did before. We're going to use context.guild as socket guild, which is right here. And we're going to say dot member count, and then we're going to use plus and then say members. Now as you can see, we didn't use the brackets, and that is always optional, but in some cases it might be more efficient. In some cases it might be nicer to just use this. I'm going to stick with this, but you can also use the brackets, it doesn't really matter. And again, we almost forgot, but we want to make these fields inline, because they're not going to be a very long text, just going to tell us how many people on the server and when the server was created. And here we can do something nice with the members. We can let the bot tell us how many people are actually online. And to do this, we can say add field online users. We're going to say context.guild as socket guild. We're going to say dot users, and then what we want here is we want to select all the users that are online. So we can say dot where user bracket user x lambda expression x dot status, and then equals user status dot online. Now we have all the users in an array, but we want to get the amount of users in this array of users. So we're going to say dot count, and this is going to give us the amount of users that are online. Then we're going to say plus, and we're going to use members. And again, we make this field inline, and we use a semicolon. Now, why did I use a space here and a space there. When we use plus, it doesn't add this space automatically for us, so we need to do this manually. Now if we would have used curly brackets, if this would be a bit shorter, then we could have just added the space in the string. Now we just need to do it at the start of the string. Let's make an actual embed out of our builder. So let's say var embed equals builder.build, and then let's send the message that we just made in the channel. So context.channel.send message asynchronously null, because we have no text, we don't want it to be text to speech, and we just want to pass in our embed, and that's it. Save your code, run the tutorial, go to Discord and use your new command, and there we go. We now have some nice information, tutorial information. In this message you can find some nice information about the current server, created at this date, member count 2, and online users 1, because the only thing that's online is the bot, and I am on do not disturb. Now let's actually get the amount of users that are online in total, and what we can do here is we can simply filter if the user is not offline. So let's go back, close the console, go back to Visual Studio, and here what we're going to do now is we're going to say x, and then in lambda expression x.status, and then is not, so exclamation mark equals user status dot offline. And this means that we are going to get the count of every user that is not offline. Save your code, run the tutorial. Go to Discord, and now let's use it and see what it returns. And there we go. Online users is now 2 because I am online and the bot is online. Now if I would turn my status into invisible and we would still use server, then we are just going to get 1 because I am offline. Let's get back online, check if it works, and ta-da, 2 members online. Now before we end this episode, there's one more thing that I want to talk to you about. Earlier we made a info command about a user, but if you would want to know information about another user, this command won't work. So let's actually make this command in a way that we can use it on other users by mentioning them. So what we can do here is we can say socket guild user, and then user equals null. Now what does this mean? We don't want the info command to only work when we mention a user. We also want it to work when we don't mention a user. When we don't mention a user, we want to use the user that sent the message. While if we do pass a user mention, then we do want it to use the mentioned user. So let's make an if statement here and say if user equals null. So if we did not mention anyone, we can just use the code that we just made. But if we did mention someone, then we want to go and else, curly brackets, and then just copy paste this code. And you want to replace context.user with just user. So we can go here, we can say user, and we can say user. Replace this right here. Replace this. And because we made the user a socket guild user, we no longer need to use this. We can just replace all of this with just user. And the same goes for here. We can just say user. Now save your code and run it. Go to Discord and use info@tutorial or someone else that is in your server. And let's see how this does. There we go. We now get some information about the bot, and as you can see, it also provided us with the nice profile picture of the bot and not just nothing. Now we can see the user ID, when it was created, when it joined the server, and the roles that it has. As you can see, it also had the tutorial role because it has that one, and everything works nicely. Now if we use the info command without mentioning anyone, we're just going to get some information about ourselves. Really cool, right? Alright guys, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and have noticed that things are getting a lot easier and we can make some really cool things with C#. If you have any questions, you can find the Discord link in the description. You can join this Discord server to get some additional support. I will be there almost all day to support you with your questions, or if you need any advice, I am also there to help you out. I hope to see you in the next episode. Have a nice day, and until then.